So I would like to call to order Public Health and Community Service Committee meeting on January 5th at 8:33 a.m. Kathy, can I please have a roll call?
Hendricks. Ness. Here. Shorten.
Here.
Van Hoff. Wagner.
Here.
Altoff.
Here.
Von Bergen.
Here. So next on the agenda are minutes for approval for Public Health and Community Services Committee meeting on October 31st, 2022. I get a motion for the minutes to approve as presented.
I'll make that motion, noting that I was not at that meeting, but that what I read seems to be appropriate, so I'll make that motion to approve the minutes as presented.
Motion by Ms. Altoff.
And I'll second for the same reason.
Okay, seconded by Ms. Wagner. Are there any amendments or revisions? All right, seeing none, could I have a voice vote, please? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Motion carries. So the next item on the agenda is public comments. Any public comments?
No public comments.
All right. I did also want to recognize board member Meshes in the audience. If you would like to join us at the table, please feel free.
Sure, thank you.
Okay. Okay, members' comments. So before I open it up to everyone, I'd first like to welcome all the new members to PHCS. While there are only 2 of us remaining from the last cycle, we have several seasoned board members with us now, and this being my first committee that I have chaired. I hope you're kind for a little bit at least. But with that, I'd also like to keep up the tradition of being open to future topics as Lori Parrish was. I think we might have a couple of carryovers, but we can kind of discuss those later in the agenda. So if anything comes up after the meeting, I would really, please let me know. I'd appreciate kind of some lead times, 7 to 10 days would be great, so I could kind of get the appropriate staff involved to answer anything. So thank you. I'm really excited and honored to be here, and I look forward to working with them. So with that, anybody have any comments? Thank you. Ms. Altoff.
Pamela Altoff, and as discussed, I talked about this at Law and Government. I'm going to suggest this committee consider the same, that as we move forward with future interviews and candidates for other boards, that prior to taking a motion, that we have a full discussion of all of those candidates. We ran into some of those issues before where motions were made about individuals, and we didn't want to vote no on someone that, had all the qualifications, but it really limited us to consider other people that maybe other board members might know a little bit more about. So I would just ask if it's okay that maybe we take up that policy and have those discussions before we actually make a motion to make a recommendation to Chairman Bueller. So that's my only comment.
That's a great policy, because there are times where we have many applying for a few seats, so it's always good to get the whole picture before we do make that.
And it's a change. Again, it's a change. In the last several years, I think board members have encouraged others from the community to come forward, and that's a good thing, but then it does lead to the fact that we have usually more applicants than vacancies. And so we should, really vet the people that we recommend to Chairman Bueller. So, thank you.
I just want to say I am thrilled to be on this committee. I've wanted to be on it for 4 years, so I'm excited to be here and dive in.
Glad to have you. Okay, seeing no other comments, we'll move on to reports. And unfortunately, Ms. Hartman is unable to join us today. So I'd like to move this item, do I have to say a date? To the
It's on this
February
one.
2nd? Okay, to the February 2nd.
Diana will be presenting her overall overview of the regional office next February, or next time at New. So she opted just to combine the two presentations.
Perfect. Okay, so new business. I don't see anything on here. Do we have any new business? I see none. So next, routine consent agenda. Is there anyone who would like to remove?
Could we remove 7.2?
All right.
Is that how you do that? Okay.
Yep.
7.1, please.
Okay. Any others? Okay, so at this point then, that I have a motion to approve the remaining resolutions on the consent agenda.
I'll move.
Moved
Second.
by Kelly, second.
Yeah.
By Lunas.
Thank you. Wagner,
Yes.
Ness,
Yes.
Shorten,
Yes.
Altough,
Yes.
Von Bergen.
Yes. Okay, so I need a motion then.
I'll make the motion to approve 7.1. Are we looking at start going in order?
7.1, so.
I'll second.
Okay, seconded by Shorten. So, discussions.
So I pulled it. So the reason I pulled it is because I was looking at the change in the bylaws here. And first I have a question before I say well, I have two questions, I guess. So I was under the impression that the chair of PHCS is supposed to be the chair of Senior Services Grant Commission. Is that correct?
That they're supposed to be the chair of Community Development and Housing Grant Commission. For
Oh.
senior services, it's selected by the chairman.
Got it, okay. So then the change here is that we are choosing 3 members on top of the chair here to be on Senior Services Grant, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So what we need to be careful of is our rules, the board rules, say all of us are supposed to be on Senior Service Grant Commission. So we're gonna need to change our board rules to comply with the Senior Services Grant Commission rules. So is that something, do you know if we'll be on at the next admin agenda?
On the next admin will be board rules to kind of present as they are.
Okay,
And note some areas if there's any changes we want to make. I think those changes will then come in February.
okay,
That's the discussion with Chairman Godwin.
okay, just wanted to make sure that we're
Thank you.
the same throughout the week.
No, it's going to take us a couple months, but we're going to get everything all synced up because we've got a few that are competing with each other.
Okay, and then when are we as a board or as a committee going to choose the 3 people to go on Senior Services Grant?
And the question is it the committee or is it the chair?
Oh.
The manner in which it's written is it would be the committee making the decisions. So once this is approved by the county board, presumably it would be on the next agenda. The selection would occur among the members of this committee.
So then does that mean we won't have a Senior Services Grant meeting until at least February, after the February?
It's set for mid-February, so it'll be
Mid-February,
after
okay,
that
all
time
right.
frame.
All right, thank you. Just wanted.
You know, it occurred to me as I was looking at all of the committees last night, can we do a general, or do I have to do a specific request about conflict of interest? Many of us are real involved in other activities in the community, and I don't want to step outside the bounds. So do I need to do that? Do we all need to do that individually, or can we ask the state's attorney to review and give us an idea of what a conflict of interest would be? I mean, I know both Carolyn and I serve on the Conservation Foundation. I don't know if it does or if it doesn't. But do we need to ask that?
I don't think you can ask a general question like that. I mean, we can only give you a general answer, but you know, you're on the Conservation Foundation, I'm not aware that they're gonna be seeking any dollars from this, resources.
Well, I guess maybe what I'm doing is just pointing it out to other members that if you do serve in other capacities where there's money involved in grant awards, you should probably ask if there's a conflict of interest in what you're doing outside of the county and county award of money. And I will do that as well. So, yeah.
Ms. Meschers?
So obviously, these amendments didn't go through Senior Services Grant Commission. So were they proposed, who proposed all the amendments?
So they were drafted up, we had some challenges with the Senior Services Grant Commission this past year, as you may recall, that we had 2 meetings in which the quorum was not met or maintained the entire time, which was the rationale for the changes.
Right.
Some of the issues that we had seen were the members were unaware that suddenly when you become a member of this committee, you're also a member of the Senior Services Grant Commission. It made it challenging schedule-wise for people who may have other careers and things going on in their lives.
Yeah.
One of the other things that we've seen is challenges with the township highway person as well. That position has not been filled since 2016. Our Division of Transportation, has, they're the experts in planning. I think they would be a valuable asset there. So we drafted something up for this group to review. I found in working with the COC for all these years that the best thing to do is put something out there for people to chew on, and then they'll have something to work with. And so this is what we did and what we proposed.
I think Hans and Faith kind of came forward, maybe back in November, with some ideas on how do we have a more effective Senior Service Grant Commission. There's a Pete, which one is it? Which one are you looking at now? Whatever one you're looking at.
Plus.
Yeah, Senior Service. Because we had that reality that we had trouble getting people here. So that's where, to your question, if we could get 3 volunteers who are more willing and able to be a part of the group, that'd be better than requiring all of you to be on it, and that raises quorum challenges and everything else. So
Right.
we've had this document for now since November. We presented it to Chairman Bueller. He was very okay with it. We even talked about putting it on the December County Board agenda without having gone through committee. And Chairman Bueller was not enthusiastic about that. He wanted you guys to look at it, wanted you guys to kind of own these proposed changes, and then amongst the 7 of you, big 3 that want to be on the Senior Service Grant Commission.
Or change the number from 3 to a higher number if that's appropriate.
So the only thing, so I'm going to put it out there and publicly say this is a little self-serving, but I really had a heart for Senior Services Grant Commission. And I was like, in our committees meeting, I said, well, Valley High has overview on this, or has overlap between what Senior Services Grant Commission is trying to do and what we see at Valley High as with the elderly population. Is this committee, obviously I'm not a voting member on the committee here, interested in thinking about taking somebody from Valley High's committee?
I was thinking the same thing. If we could adjust these so it says PHCS or Valley High committees. The reason why this came up is because as much as I'd like to be on Senior Services Grant Committee, I have a conflict of interest. And she would like to be on it, so we had talked to Chairman Bueller about her being in my place, but obviously she's not on this committee.
I would ask for a more general statement, because I would be concerned that as Valley High moves forward, if we get to where we say we're going to get, we created that committee basically to go forward with the project.
Right.
When the project is done, maybe the committee will be dissolved. So I'm just, because we had talked about that too previously. So I'm just cautious that maybe as you do that, you don't identify Valley High, maybe you just identify another board member or something like that. So I just throw that out there too. I mean, I don't think I'm ready to make any commitment today, but I just, I always, past experience has led me to believe that you don't want to always necessarily be that focused in if you want a little bit of latitude. That's my only comment. Thank you.
That's a good suggestion. So
So do we want to have Valley High, or do we think maybe we want to say among the members?
No,
of the-
Peter said,
No,
no,
Valley
I
High
don't
has
think so
never-
either.
Valley High has never received a nickel from the Senior Service
They don't.
Grant Commission. I mean, if you want to open the membership or recommendations, just have the recommendations come from this committee and don't limit it to a member of this committee. I don't know, that's maybe the way to do it.
I was
Member of the
gonna
county
say,
board.
Go ahead.
I quit, I told you, sorry, thank you, Pam Altoff. I would recommend that maybe what we do is amend this to say 3 members of the committee and an additional board member with, you guys are the wordsmiths, with some related component. I mean, it would make sense maybe for somebody on transportation.
Well, it does.
So maybe
It does make
some
sense, yeah.
related committee affiliation or something like that. I'm not a wordsmith, but you get what I intend.
The other option is to say,
15, so that's-
Public Health and Community Service Committee chooses 3 members of the county board. to
Selected by this
serve.
committee.
So, yeah, we select, it doesn't have to be from this committee. I mean, it's just, if you talk general, that would be general.
Yeah.
Maybe it's too general.
I bet I have members from this committee, but.
But we could make that decision, this committee would be making that decision, so.
But you'll have other people who will advocate to be on it, and you just have opened up that door a little bit broader than I would have opened it up.
This might be a non-issue, right? I don't know, many of the members on this committee are new even to the board. So it may be that all 7 of you wished to be on Senior Services Grant Commission, and then I'm obviously not needed as a body. But as Tracy and I were the only ones that came back from the board. Tracy, I, and then Paul, Dr. Jensen are the 3 members that were from the board that were on there the last 2 years. I think it's a great discussion. Yeah.
Why don't we continue to mull it over, and why don't you give us maybe some options as to what that would be? I mean, I still am very comfortable with 3 people from this committee, because it is this committee, and then to open it up to a general member on the board that would have related issues or something.
Is this a suggestion to bring that to the COW, or should we bring it to the committee next month?
I defer to the chair.
When you need committee.
I think we could keep it at committee level before we move it on to the board.
Do you need a senior service meeting next in February?
There's typically one in February, we could just move that one to March.
Well, our next meeting is the 2nd February, so.
You wouldn't get the rules approved till the 3rd Tuesday in February.
We might be able to squeeze
Is
it.
that okay?
Okay, so at this point then, moving on, we're just moving that to next month's HCS committee meeting.
Need a motion.
We need a motion to table?
So moved.
Is it a,
Second.
okay,
Altoff, second.
also second, shortened motion? And then really quickly, I wanted to welcome Eric Hendricks to the meeting. Roll call, please.
Hendricks,
Here.
Ness,
Here.
Shorten,
Yes.
Wagner.
Yes.
Yes, is that a yes?
It's a yes.
Altoff,
Yes.
Von Bergen.
Yes.
Yes, not just
Okay, 7
Madam Chair, in the interim, if sitting committee members want to be on Senior Service Grant Commission, let Chair Von Bergen know or on, so we kind of get a flavor as we move into February, how much competition there is for these seats.
Good idea. Okay. Let me know. Okay, moving on, 7.2. Could I get a motion?
Thank you.
A motion.
Motion by Wagner.
Second by Altoff.
Altoff, sure. Okay, discussion.
So I would like a little more information about so what I found, so I was curious about how this falls under public health when it feels like it fits under PE&D, because it's a housing, it's a block grant function. And that the chairs trade positions on the funding commissions. So could we talk about that?
Sure. I would say it doesn't really belong under public health, it belongs under community services, the other half of this committee, public health and community services. The senior service grant program is an option in Illinois counties, and it's a voter-approved levy that dates back to like 2003. For many years, the administration of that program lived in county administration. And I don't know, 10 years ago now, 8 years ago, we shed that responsibility and found that the Senior Service Grant Commission fit better and more in line with the kind of work that Hans has been doing in community development. Senior Service Grant Commission is not necessarily about housing. It's about all kinds of grants. And they do busing and technology and health, and I mean, there's lots of different sorts of things that they're doing. But it didn't fit very squarely. When past boards made the decision to move the senior service responsibilities from county.
I think I was talking about the Community Development and Housing Grant Commission. I'm looking at those bylaws.
And I think what
Not
he,
the,
They both live with community development.
right, they belong, so to me, I feel like they fit under PE&D, like the CBHG. I just wondered why, we would be voting on these in public health and community services. It feels more like a housing function, which,
It is a housing function, but I think PED is more about land use than the policy.
really? Oh, that's interesting. Okay, I don't
Yeah,
see it
yeah.
like that, but that's okay.
No.
Because that's where the community development block grant funds sit, right?
Under planning and development.
Under planning and development. So that was my first thing. That seemed a more logical fit there, because we're typically talking outside of housing infrastructure and low-income areas and those kinds of things, with a very small amount of public service money, correct?
Correct.
Right,
Under
so
CDBG.
that was, I found that, I didn't understand why it was here.
I can probably add a little bit.
You can add plenty.
A little bit of historical information. So in 2016, or probably late 2015, the bylaws were changed for the CDHG Commission. And the significant change was to move the housing and the CDBG programs back together into one group, and then sunset the existing commission to reduce the number of members to what you see, plus one more was added on at a later time, another county board member. At that time in 2016, we did report to the Planning Development Committee. Committees were revised, so senior services always went to public health and human services. Committees were revised in 2017 with an election, and at that time, we were moved entirely over to PHCS.
And the C was added to
Correct.
health and community services.
To represent Hans and his division. Community development. So that's where the change was made, so that maybe what you recall from the past, that we did report to that group, and when that group was revised to include more environmental and other issues, that's where the change was made. So the historical thing's been about 5 years now.
So could you explain to me how the chair of public health and the chair of PED become chairs and vice chairs of the funding commissions? Like, they're not, like, I also find that interesting in that you chair two huge committees, and then you also chair the funding commissions that fall under them. How did that happen? Because when I asked Member Smith, he said it was written that way and that's the way they do it. But I don't know how that came about.
I think that was to maintain that connection. So we're a division of planning and development, and we, in that 2017 revision that happened with the committees, we lost the connection to our overall department.
Oh, okay.
So we had Larry Smith as our chair just coincidentally previously, and he had been PED chair. And the desire was to add another county board member on for continuity, and so the decision was made by the county board 2 years ago to add PHCS as the person who would chair it, so that we would have a defined set of roles for the individuals, rather than, you know, having to make that selection of somebody who may not have been on the commission in the past and may not have been through the grant process previously. So this way, we do have 2 county board members, presumably with elections.
Well, it's not the county board members that I'm asking about, is that it's the chairs of 2 committees who are the chair and vice chair of 2 funding streams, and how could that responsibility be shared more broadly among other county board members if they were interested. I want to be clear, I'm not interested in chairing either commission. You know, I've done that. It's not that I couldn't do it, but I am curious about how that bottleneck then occurs at the committee level. I'm just, that's just my comment about the bylaws, yeah.
So if I can add in, under the bylaws and the membership, it just references 2 members of the McHenry County Board, one being a representative of PED and the other being a representative of PHCS. It doesn't specify the chairs.
I don't know, if you go under officers, Mark, it says the officer, the blah, 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 the representative, okay, all right, okay. I stand corrected. I'm always willing to know when I read it wrong. So.
As are we all, I hope. And
So then my other question would be, does CBHG then report to this committee or so it reports here? So if we were looking at the mission of this commission, which is to provide decent, affordable housing, it would come off this committee and not, okay. Thank you. Well, thank you for.
And that is the hierarchy, like all of the decisions for the grants go through this.
Yeah, it seems incongruent to me, but if that's the way you do it, that's the way you do it.
Well, and I apologize for my disjointed answer.
Well, because-
But the community service function seemed to fit, again, 5 years ago, more with what this committee was doing than with the land use driven mission of PED. And it kind of kept Hans more focused on one committee rather than kind of dancing in 2 committees, because he does live in the planning and development office.
It just feels like when you're looking at an affordable housing development, we're looking at bricks and sticks and infrastructure and all those things that go into.
But we aren't, your PED committee really isn't looking at affordable housing.
Oh, really? Then I must have asked to be on the wrong committee.
No, but just under an affordable.
I don't know, you got strong. I don't know where I belong. What can I say?
An affordable housing development is.
Well, I'm on the right committee, okay.
Well, you know, an affordable housing development is going to be in an incorporated area where you can have some density and you don't need well and septic, you know.
Well,
So
I
it's gonna
would
be-
disagree with you a little bit about that, but that's okay. That's only because we just haven't looked outside the box on that issue. But thank you very much for, thank you. I'm good.
you yield.
I don't know. Where is she going with it?
Okay, we have Ms. Wagner.
I just have a question, Hans. So on page 22 of our packet, which is page 2 of the bylaws, there is, under appointment, there's a whole section that's crossed out. The initial membership of the commission shall consist of the current members of the McHenry County Community Development and Housing Grant Commission that desire to serve. So just wondering why that's stricken.
That's a scrivener's error from that 2015 revision that needs to be bounced out. That's the Housing Commission and the CDBG Commission combining back together to accidentally state in the
Got
revision
it.
that was done back then.
Okay.
For the record, I started on January 4th of 2016, so 7 years as of yesterday. So I missed that.
Got it. Thank you.
Mr. Hendricks.
I just have one question on page 2 under the third membership. It looks like there's crossed out 1 or more at-large delegates from each of the county board districts based upon place of residence for a total of 9 at-large delegates. Is there a reason why it wouldn't be 1 member, at-large member per district versus as a whole? Or is it a difficult filling positions?
The challenge is, like you look at District 8 and it's gigantic, and so there's a better chance of somebody residing or working in that area than anywhere else. So this revision really stemmed out of the election process changing, where we have the 9 districts now. And so the effort will be to have someone representing every district, but people have to attrition off of the commission, the at-large members. So that was rewritten in that way to also allow those instances where somebody's employed in a district where we're having a challenge, they can be employed there and represent that area, so that we don't have the challenge of saying, all right, we have multiple people from one district, and we have the problem of not being able to fill the ones that are vacant.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, any other discussion? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Wagner,
Yes.
Hendricks,
Yes.
Shorten,
Yes.
Ness,
Yes.
Altough,
Yes.
Von Bergen.
Yes. Okay, old business. Is there any old business? I don't see any on the agenda, so we will move to presentations. So first up, Melissa Adamson.
Hello, I'm Melissa Adamson. I'm the Public Health Administrator, but I do want to start off by introducing our staff in the room. So we have Mary Ellen Howell. She is our Director of our Veterinary Public Health Division. Susan Karras is the Director of our Nursing Division. Ann Barron is the Director of Planning and Operations. She's in our Health Administration Division. And then we have Patty Noem, who is the Director of Environmental Health. So for those of you who are planning on taking a tour, we will, you'll have time to speak with them. And if you have any questions today, I have a Q&A slide. I was told to keep it quick. Oh, you gonna get me going? So we're actually located, we have 4 offices in 3 buildings in 2 locations. So we are in Woodstock and Crystal Lake. So we're, thank you, in lots of places. And so I'm just keeping it real high level today. In 2022, we revised our mission and vision statement, really focusing on inclusion, some of those core public health things about promoting and protecting health and safety and well-being. And of those who live, learn, work, and play in McHenry County, that's really capturing that inclusion. And our vision for the future is an integrated public health system that supports health and well-being for everyone. And for those who are unfamiliar with public health, I know a lot of you, we've had lots of conversations, but public health often is working in the background, except maybe when there's a pandemic, and then we play a more prominent role, at least in the public's eye, right? We become a little more well-known, which is what has occurred recently. But public health is all about prevention of spread of disease, environmental hazards, preventing injuries, promoting healthy behavior. So it's a very broad discipline. And this is what is called the core functions and essential services of public health. This is a framework. The 10 essential services is a public health framework to protect and promote health of all people in all communities. The assessment function, these are things like we're doing in the background. Again, surveillance, collecting data and information about health problems so that we can diagnose things and determine what needs to be done, what hazards exist, and very data-driven. The policy development is identifying problems, analyzing policy, working with community members. What is the action that needs to be taken? Collaboration, partnership in the community, and also our regulatory component. And then the assurance is everything from ensuring equity, which you see is in the center of the wheel, but access to care, building a diverse, skilled workforce so that we can respond accordingly. Innovating, evaluation, research, and then building and maintaining public health infrastructure. So the Board of Health was established by the McHenry County Board in 1966, and it is a 12-member board that served 3-year terms The statutes require that we have 2 physicians, a dentist, a registered nurse, and then we have a county member liaison, and the rest of the members are at large. Right now, we have representation from farmers to first responders on the board, additional nurses and physicians, and animal advocate. The Board of Health authority is laid out in statutes. I did not list, all the authority that the Board of Health has. I just gave you a sample, so enforcing state and local public health laws and investigating infectious diseases. Obviously, the staff is what does that component. Conducting sanitary and health inspections, establishing policies and recommending ordinances, which then go through the county board for approval, approving the department budget, and approving contracts and agreements. They also are responsible for hiring the public health administrator and appointing a medical advisor. So we are what is considered a certified local health department. What that means is we are required to do certain mandated programs, which is infectious disease, food protection, potable water, and private sewage. We also are required to do a community health strategic plan. That's what we call our community health assessment and improvement plan. I'll talk a little more about that in a couple of slides. So again, we have 4 divisions: environmental, nursing, veterinary, and our administration. Administration is where we have our fiscal operations, do our HR, etc. And then the next slide, or next 2 slides, we'll walk through the other ones. We have 119 full-time employees, and our budget is roughly $7 million. That fluctuates, obviously, year over year. So here's the breakdown of our revenue and expenses. So about 2/3 of our revenue comes from grants, fees and fines, permits, licenses, and only 1/3 from the tax levy. And our expenses are primarily personnel, which you probably expect. Vaccine inventory is something that we have to track, and just appears on as a line item in our budget. Because we're so big, it was really hard to get this all. It's a little hard to see, but it gives you hopefully some perspective of all the work that the health department does. And again, this is not exhaustive, but we have a lot going on across each of our divisions. And I hope that you do take the tour, and if you're not available today, to reach out and we'll schedule time so that you can meet and spend more time with each of the division directors, meet some of the staff regarding the important work that they are doing. So here's a summary slide of within the divisions, the type of work that takes place. So our environmental health, that's where we do food protection, go into restaurants, do inspections, ensure that what is being served is safe and they're following appropriate food practices, potable water, private sewage, solid waste planning. You may see our recycling events. We respond to public health nuisance, burning ordinance, etc. We do have a lab downstairs, which you can see where we test water samples. In our nursing division, everything from communicable disease, that's where our epidemiology team is housed, so that's who's doing the surveillance and tracking the data. Maternal child health initiatives, community health, that's where we're really out in the community with partnerships, our emergency preparedness program. We operate some prevention and screening programs, Illinois Breast and Cervical Cancer Program, and Illinois Wise Movement, and we also have a TB program. In our veterinary public health, also known as our animal control, everything from our rabies vaccination and registration, animal cruelty investigations, bite investigations, nuisance calls. So really environmental health often and veterinary public health are very complaint driven. So when we get a complaint, we go out and review that complaint. We also have an adoption center. Some people I just learned recently didn't know. Oh, question?
I was just gonna say, I'm watching everybody write down furiously. You're gonna send us this too, right?
No, you have to remember everything. Yes, we will send it out. And then we have a really great website, so we have tons of information. Happy to send you this and any other information. Like I said, this is just really high level. Then again, the community health assessment and improvement plan, really that should go under nursing, but it is a requirement of the organization. We are the registrar for the county, so we have vital records, that's our birth and death records, our fiscal piece, and public information, which is our communications. And then, so we just recently completed our community health assessment. The entire assessment is online, and I can send a link to that, but these were the priorities that were selected. So what we do is we both survey the community itself, get input from residents on what they think are priorities. We have key informant interviews, experts in the field who review the data, we compile the data, and then we had a prioritization event and they selected each of these. So now what happens is we have something called Mobilizing for Action through Planning and Partnership committees, and they do the work. So they implement strategies to address each of these priorities and develop objectives, goals and objectives for each of the areas. And I don't know if that was 10 minutes. So if you have any questions.
I do.
Okay.
So, 28% of your revenues are grants. In your program, I saw that. What happens when those grants end?
Well, so some of them are grants that we rely on year over year, like our local health protection grants. So by being a certified local health department, we have access to that grant. I don't want to say it's guaranteed in, perpetuity, but it is something that we rely on. So there are grants that we get year over year, but fiscal cycles change, funding availability changes, so we would have to look at whether or not we could continue, providing a program if any of those grants were to go away. But we are always looking at new grants that meet our mission or our community health assessment priorities.
Well, I guess the question is because public health is a vital service to the health and well-being of the community, that the vagary of the granting process, which, yes, sometimes you get it and it gets renewed, but when it doesn't, to drop a program feels very inefficient to me. And so I don't know if there's been a conversation at the county board on, because 28% is a significant chunk of revenue. It is.
It is.
It is. And so I came from the not-for-profit world. I get that whole thing. Sometimes that is a anxiety-producing process, especially if you're running a program and the money stops and you drop the program and people use it. So I would not want to see that happen.
But I think, can I answer for you? A little bit, maybe? Correct me if I'm wrong. But I think that's part, Lou, of the budget process. When we know that we have access to available funds outside the county's budget, then you depend upon that for that fiscal year. As we look at the budgets moving forward, if that would change, we would have to make some decisions, and that is in our hands.
I do understand what you're saying, but what I'm saying is that public health is a vital link in the health of this community, and the fact that almost 30% comes from grants, I'm just saying, I'm just putting my opinion out there. I would rather see, if you're doing 5 or 10%, I guess, yeah, I'd be like, yay, but 28% is a lot of money.
Again, I'm responding. So you need to draw our attention to that. We all, as committee members, need to be cognizant of that as we enter into the budget cycle with, I'm pointing to my chair, but the finance. But again, it's a priority. When you're dealing with money, you're going to count on when you have it, not applying for it and counting on it because it's been awarded. Then that allows you to manipulate money in other areas.
I get all of that, Pam.
I know you do. So I'm just saying, the statement is, we need to look and decide if that's a priority to ensure that every year we're funding them at the level they needed to be funded.
We'll talk.
Okay, so, I have said for years that, it's pretty much the same thing Lou has. It's hard to, we rely on them, but it's also a hard look too. would we be willing, would the county board as a whole, if we lost some grant money, be willing to raise taxes to keep these services? So what's important is that we have people who can write the grants. And is it the people who are in these positions who write the grants, or do you have a grant writer?
We don't have just one grant writer. I mean, we do have some staff who are our primary folks who respond to the grants, but it is a shared responsibility across the divisions depending on which area of expertise or what the grant is would depend on who's responding or applying to that grant.
All right, so it should be, we also should know then that we're taking time away from public health services to write these grants. And also, can we go back to the slide that talks about, okay, nope, you had the right one. IB, CCP, and IWW, what are those?
So Illinois Breast and Cervical Cancer Program is a breast and cervical cancer screening program and treatment for eligible women who are uninsured or underinsured. And they have to meet certain income eligibility requirements. And the Illinois Wise Woman is about cardiovascular disease prevention.
All right. And
Is
so
It's called Illinois Wise Women?
Wise Woman.
Oh, aren't we all?
That's a good
Don't answer that question, let's know the
That's
answer.
probably why they, so that one is focused on diet, physical activity, and other lifestyle behavioral changes to control cardiovascular and other chronic diseases.
So are these also funded with grants?
Correct.
Okay. And so going, I know this is a controversial subject, but there's also other grant money out there that we're not taking, which could further women's health. So the Title 10. And I just want to put that out there, that's something we can think about, because we are not taking money from the state, that it would basically be free money for the county that we could further women's health, contraception, exams, and include exams too,
For Title,
Title 10.
I guess I can't, I would think yes,
Okay.
but I don't know, might depend on what the specific grant funding is covering.
I'm not sure everything it involves, but, okay. Thank you.
Mr. Shorten, did you have
Maybe a real simple, high-level question, but most of the grants come from state and federal funding?
Yes, occasionally we get private grants, like we have one for in our animal control right now. Am I gonna get this right? Animal League Defense Fund, so that was a specific grant. So it depends, but most of our grants, yes, are state and federal.
Okay.
Like our WIC program, so under maternal child health, or within the nursing division, so women, infants, and children is a supplemental nutrition program that is a federally funded program.
I just have two more questions. Oh, I'm sorry, did I jump on you?
I was just going to follow up.
Go
if
ahead.
that's okay. And so are most of the state and federal grants, is that a situation where you have to have continually apply for those, or are they allocated at the state and federal level?
No, we do have to apply for them.
You do, okay.
Mhm. Some of them are multi-year grants, so we might not have to apply every year, but they all have an end date, and again, they're not guaranteed, but they are pretty reliable thus far.
Okay.
It really depends on what it is.
And is the application process for state and federal grants, or, like you said, it's year over year, but you have to reapply, is that application process challenging, or is it pretty much take the version from 3 years ago and update the dates?
No, you have to update. Susan, I'm going to look at you on this one because Susan, again, is the director of nursing, and that's where the majority of our grants live in terms of the services and programs that are being offered. So,
as far as with the recurring grants, long-term recurring, it is, I mean, we pretty much just get the allotment. They'll give us the budget that we're going to be applying for, what we're eligible for, and typically it's a cut, and then we might have to make some changes in personnel and move money from our expenditures up into personnel to cover our personnel. It's just adjustment of the budget is typically, but the deliverables and the goals of the grant don't typically change that often.
Okay.
but that is, okay, so now that Susan responded, I'm going to take the opportunity to say that is one of the challenges we have in our budget, right? If it's a stagnant grant, so year over year, the amount doesn't change, or if the amount decreases, we still have the same amount of work, but now we have put staff, because that's our biggest expense, right? Balancing the staff that are going to the grant and are putting them back on the general fund. So it's this constant kind of back and forth and needing, the support and working with the county board to ensure that those programs can continue. So that we don't lose staff as a result when the grants can no longer support them.
And I apologize, going back to, and you and I talked, but that's what I'm saying. So it just flops over to the general fund, and I don't know if that's a directive that's been given and that's exactly why we do it, or if that's just a function of the budget that you submit to the board for review. When you have to make those changes and you're still keeping staff.
So we do make those recommendations to bring forward, but it can be a challenge sometimes when we are required, to stay within a maintenance budget, but the personnel costs are going to continue to increase.
Right, recognize that. I'm just saying that there's a, a synergy between what you're doing and then what the county board decisions that we will make that affect the delivery of those services.
But I know that when you're an administrator and you're looking at people who do the work and the revenue that's not there and the services that you're still expected to provide, given the fluidity of your funds, that can be harrowing when you think, A, I can't pay a person, and B, I can no longer provide these vital services. I think that's not a good position to put an organization in. I just don't.
So what are you proposing then?
I'm not proposing anything.
No.
I'm proposing that we look at the funding structure. I am aligned with Kelly in that 30% in grant funding, it feels precarious to me, especially because we're talking about indigent and underinsured and low-income families, which, it's all linked, right, to affordable housing and workforce housing. If we remove pieces of the net from families, they fall into that horrible situation of entrenched poverty, and it is really hard to dig out of that.
But and if I could
Oh, yeah.
just briefly, and then unfortunately I do have to go, I have a court case to run to. But so say, for whatever reason, say all 30% of the grants were pulled for 1 year. A budget could still be submitted to the board to make up that gap, right?
Yeah, but I think, Eric, what I'm thinking about is something that Melissa and Susan pointed to, and to your question. How much, and Mike, how much staff time is used to prepare those applications can be weighty and complicated, which means that supervision of programs and people is not taking place, or it's taking place on top of the additional work. So
Yeah,
we're
it's
doing-
definitely taking place.
Yeah, I didn't mean to.
There's also there's a lot of reporting requirements, and
Yes.
sometimes grant funding is so categorical, you don't have enough flexibility to do some of the other work. Little bird whispered in my ear just as a reminder that there are other, so
You're a piece of
we're a piece of a larger system, right? And so public health does work in tandem with the system as a whole. So there are other safety net providers in the community, and it's important to understand that. It's important for us to understand what others are doing and where there are gaps in case we need to step in and fill those holes or work with others to fill those holes. So I think when we look at it as a whole, but public health is so vital that you want to
Yes.
make sure that that infrastructure is there so that we're ready to respond to something really big, and then everything that's happening day in, day out to keep people safe.
There are others providing those services to the indigent population, and you're coordinating with them, but you're not the only answer for the indigent population.
That did not turn up at the doors that I knocked on in the last campaign. Access to care and resources was repeated over and over.
Yeah, and as you saw, it is a priority for us, so we'll have to look deeper into that to find out, is it transportation? In fact, I guess it'll be next month, we'll be bringing another resolution forward that is adding money to the IBCCP grant that is specifically to help with some access and barriers such as transportation.
Okay, Ms. Measures.
To add, so my understanding would be that the grant funding isn't all coming in on us the same day. So in this scenario where we're losing 30%, we're losing all those grant money, it wouldn't be on one day that we lose all this money. It'd be a course of the year, right? The grant money comes at different times.
Yes, but I would say the majority of it, so this, the state's fiscal year is July 1. That doesn't mean that those dollars are there on July 1.
Yeah.
So oftentimes, a contract is in place, but the money hasn't been received, right? So there's this overlap or gap between getting money, starting programs. So thus far, we've been fortunate we don't have to disrupt programming. Smaller health departments are not in the same similar situation. They may not be able to continue a program until they get that money.
And my other point would be for us to remember is that grant money, when it's coming from the state or the federal government, is tax money. So if we want to say we don't want grants anymore, we'll just raise taxes at McHenry County, that's actually not in our best interest because we're already paying taxes. The money that's going to the state and going to the federal government that funds these grants is also our money. And so we could double tax ourselves, which would be a bad idea, right? Or we can say, yes, we want to use our tax dollars that we pay to the state and the federal government to then tap into those grants. I'm a big opponent of the state and the federal government having these grants, and for the purpose of us being able to then tap into it. So my general sense would be that if these grants start drying up on us, we'll have time to then figure out how we're going to move our budget around, our general funds, to be able to keep services for the county. Because I certainly do want to keep all of our services, and I'm glad that we have been able to be so successful in writing our grants. That's why we have to support our staff so that they have the time and staffing to be able to meet the needs of the requirements of the grants. So thank you.
Okay, I don't have any really questions, but I do have a small request. The departmental chart that you included, is it possible to get the leadership names maybe
Yeah, absolutely.
on there? I think it would be helpful for me.
No, we include those in the budget, I think.
Okay.
Again, it's hard on a tiny slide
Sure.
to keep everything
Yep.
in there for you, for it to be readable.
Okay, thank you,
Thank you.
Melissa. Next up, Hans Mott with Community Development and Housing Grant Commission.
Hello. So I didn't say this last time for the record. My name is Hans Mott, Community Development Administrator. I always remember to say that, and I didn't do that this time, so my apologies for that. I don't have a presentation to put up here. I'm just going to go ahead and talk and allow you to ask some questions so that we can stay in our 10-minute presentation time frame and, of course, answer all the questions that you may have. So our division is part of, it's federally funded. One of the things that we did do, just as a point of reference for our program year 2019, we used to be on calendar year program years. And we worked with HUD to revise our program year to extend it by 9 months. So program year 2019 was 21 months long. It was very hard to do that with our budget, but we did it. And in doing so, we know a year in advance whether or not we'll be funded. So that's something very important that just came up in the last conversation that I wanted to make you aware of. As far as state grants are concerned, we don't really receive as many state grants. We do seek some opportunities out from time to time, and we have received those. The state's offices are iffy to work with, I'll be completely honest with you. Some are great, some are DHS. But I digress. But I'll tell you a little bit about HUD's Community Planning and Development Grants. So there are 4 entitlement grant programs under CPD with HUD that we would technically be entitled to. We don't receive all 4, we receive 2 of them. That's the Community Development Block Grant Program and the Home Investment Partnerships Program. The other 2 that we don't receive are the Emergency Solutions Grant Program. That is funneled through the state, and we work with the Continuum of Care to allocate those funds. The other one is HOPA, which is Housing Opportunities for Persons with AIDS. The only recipients are the state of Illinois and the city of Chicago. So our clients would go to the city of Chicago's catchment area. So with CDBG, We typically receive an annual allocation of around $1.4, $1.5 million per year. It's been pointed out to me a number of times that that's similar to what we got when we started with the program in 1995. So I'll give you a little bit of facts about that. When the program started overall for the federal government in 1975, after it was approved by a bipartisan Congress, and something we haven't seen anymore either, it was funded nationally at $2.473 billion. That was with 594 entitlements. By 1980, they included the states with 30% of the overall allocation, and then all the small communities would report to the state. And then as you were a city with 50,000 individuals living there, or 200,000 as a county, you moved into an entitlement, and that's what we did in 1995. There are over 1,200 recipients now. 214 of those are counties, and it's funded at $3.3 billion. So obviously, not keeping up with inflation, that would be $13.68 billion, meaning we'd get something like 3 to 4 times higher than what we get. Congress is well aware of this, and they're working on reauthorizations for both CDBG and home. This has been discussions that's been happening for about 2 years now, so they haven't come to a conclusion or the final goal on that. But the expectation is that if they do, both programs would increase significantly in the level of funding nationally, then that would trickle down to the county. The CDBG program, you can do almost anything with the funds. So there's public services, those are common things, homeowner occupied rehab, typically for seniors, are some programs that we do, infrastructure programs in low and moderate income areas, so that has to be an area in which, in our case, 44.61% or higher are at 80% or less of the area median income. It's a big word soup, but that typically the program is designed to benefit low income individuals in their community. Our Home Investment Partnerships program, that actually has gone up in funding over the past several years. We're right around $700,000 per year. Used to be more in the neighborhood of about $430,000 when I started working here. And obviously they're looking at a reauthorization for that program, but its signature use is for the development of affordable housing and the maintenance of affordable housing. So by development, that could be acquisition and rehab of existing units. They would benefit individuals at 60% or less of area median income. You could also buy into construction of units. That's a pretty common activity. We have done tenant-based rental assistance programs. Those are commonly with our homeless service providers. It's a 2-year program, so it's not a permanent solution to homelessness, but it buys people time to not be homeless. Speaking of our homeless assistance program, we are the lead organization for the continuum of care. In our instance, we're one of 14 unified funding agencies, meaning we're the direct recipient of COC dollars now. That's out of 460 nationally. This program has actually seen increases over the past several years. A component of it is that emergency solutions grant that I talked about a little bit earlier. That's pretty much flat funded. That's the entry-level program. The program that's been highly supported by Congress has been the COC program, because that's providing permanent solutions to ending homelessness, and it's not band-aiding things along. One of the things that was approved in the last budget very recently, last month, for fiscal 23, would be the inclusion of the opportunity to seek out permanent supportive housing construction funds, which they have not had. So I'm hoping that the formula is something that we can benefit from. Sometimes it tends to favor urban cities like Chicago or Los Angeles, where they have high homeless populations. Some other programs that we offer are also our Lead Safe Homes program. That's a specialty program. We have a staff person specifically assigned to that. That's to assist with lead-based paint remediation for households with children 6 or under age 6, I should say. And of course, referrals from the health department for individuals with elevated blood levels so that we can abate those hazards. That's a special program that we started in 2020. We also have some additional programs that have been the result of the pandemic. So Community Development Block Grant, it's COVID funds, Home ARP program funds, which are just like home, reduced in the amount of use, so we don't do home buyer and we don't do any home or occupied rehab. That's specifically targeted toward new housing development. In our community, that was the demand for the need. One of the biggest programs that we're working with right now is a $16 million Treasury Emergency Rental Assistance Program. Phase 1 is going to end at the end of January. Phase 2 will continue going on in assisting residents to avoid homelessness with up to 18 months of assistance. It also can be used for affordable housing once you stop using for the tenant-based rental assistance portion. We've assisted 827 households with that program, which is about 2,000 individuals that were not out on the streets as a result of the pandemic. So that's a pretty significant impact. Some of the other things, I think, Kelly, you may have these numbers already for that we had sent out, but actually this level of assistance has really done a number on the amount of homeless people that we've had in the community. So in 2020, we looked at 396 individuals that were homeless. By 2021, that knocked down to 245. So that means that these programs have assisted homeless individuals with housing. Again, it's more of a temporary measure, but it's definitely made that impact of keeping people off the streets and keeping people away from congregate settings, which we were avoiding with the pandemic. Other than that, some other opportunities that we've taken advantage of have been state pass-throughs of Treasury funds, and that's been to assist local businesses. So we've had 3 different rounds of funding between CDBG and the state's Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, which is a great office to work with.
They need more people, but let's not talk about that.
And so they've been great, and so we've run those 3 different funding rounds, one for very small businesses, one for medium businesses that was set by the county board at a level of $15,000 per business, and then another one that was run through the CDHG Commission with a special side group that worked on evaluating each of those cases that was up to $50,000 of CDBG CD funds. So we had some local employers, local businesses that have benefited from this program and have transformed their business to be able to continue past the pandemic.
Okay. Are those monies limited to people only in the unincorporated area of McHenry County, or can anybody there?
They're countywide.
Okay.
So what's interesting about, we have to do what's called an urban county certification every 3 years. So as part of that certification, especially the border communities have to make a determination as to whether they want to split and be in both counties.
Right, Lake or McHenry,
Yeah, and so like Barrington splits all the way around. Huntley is all within our catchment area. And then Fox Lake, I think, was the one that went into Lake. So that's a very small population that we have there. Algonquin splits. So that's the jurisdiction that we can provide the support to, anywhere within that area.
Thank you.
Sure. But that's pretty much an overview. We do have 6.0 FTEs. We have an additional 2.0 FTEs that are temporary individuals with all the temporary projects that we've been working on over the past 3 years. I did start off with much darker beard, and I saw somebody I hadn't seen in a few years who said, "You look like Santa Claus. Merry Christmas." And so, but I digress again. But one of the things I do want to point out is when, with our 2015 to 2019 plan, our plan was valued at $7.7 million. That's a consolidated plan that we do every 5 years. Current plan 2020 to 2024 is $52 million. So it's a significant difference in the amount of work our team has had to do. They've really been champs with all of it.
When you hire those people specifically for those programs, do they understand that there's a time element with regard to that may not be permanent employment with the county?
Yeah, so when we make offers, there is an indication in the offer letter to staff of community development that it is based on grant funds, unfortunately, and that, there's a potential that grant funding could be cut by Congress, and that, the result could be
I just wanted to be responsible. I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, so it's definitely, I know that came up in the last conversation, and that is something that we have in our job offers for not for temp, obviously temp individuals, there's no guarantee of anything, but for individuals who are permanent hires, that's in their job offer.
Ms. Hess,
Go ahead, Kelly.
It was just a quick question. You said 6 full-time employees and 3 temporary employees?
2,
Oh, 2.
6 and 2. I'm one of the 6.
So are you the single point of entry for the continuum of care? Who is the single point of entry in this county?
Pioneer Center is the coordinated entry lead, and they're the single point of
Okay,
entry.
so who manages the data part of it?
The data part is managed by our office. That was something we took over in
Oh,
2016.
so you manage the data,
Correct.
they do the assessment and eligibility, and where do they place, since you're not getting emergency solution money, what is and families don't work in congregate setting, they don't in shelters. It is a bad solution for families. Where are people being put, where's the money coming from for the prevention of homelessness?
So the prevention aspects right now would be Treasury and the eligibility to apply to the state for prevention funds.
Okay.
The Housing Authority has the Community Services Block Grant Program, which offers some prevention activities there. It's what they've opted as part of their plan to do. It's not a requirement that they do, but they've seen that as one of their biggest needs. And lastly, there's a very small allocation that comes from DHS that's allocated between Prairie State and I think it's Consumer Credit right now that works on prevention. On the housing end of things, the COC program is the big source of funds. Coordinated entries, sole purpose is to make determinations based on an assessment of the individual in terms of where they rank in placement. So when a slot opens up, which used to be all group homes, right? So Pioneer is the only one operating group homes for permanent supportive housing now. Thresholds has opted to move all the individuals out to community-based settings. They determined that model is kind of an older model to have everyone in, hey, it's sort of like on TV where we bring everyone in the house and see what happens. That's literally what happens. So we found that people living in independent settings do much better.
So if Mary and John Smith are couch surfing, moving from home to home, and they have to leave, and they come through the single point event, where would Pioneer house them that night?
So they have the emergency shelter setting.
No, but, and they house families in the emergency shelter?
They have made some modifications to the building to allow for that. However, it's primarily set up for single individuals. So
Right, so where will they put those families?
They would put them in the two new areas that they set up with the most recent renovation they did to the building. And that's not enough space. If you have 3 families come in,
Yeah,
you know,
so
that's
they don't
really-
use hotels or motels as backups, or they do?
They do. So we have allocated some funds, especially
Wow.
with cold weather assistance.
That's
So the
Very
cold weather
good.
assistance is in effect now when the weather falls under a certain temperature.
Thanks, Hans.
Sure, you're welcome.
Would you be interested in more numbers on that? How many families are actually accessing?
To go see the Pioneer Shelter?
Well, I've done that, but the actual numbers and usage and what's happening currently.
Yeah, I would really, and I did,
I would too, so
Yeah.
if that could be provided, or added as an agenda item, I'd be real interested in seeing that.
Yeah, would you like it broken down by organization and how many
yeah,
individuals?
I think so,
as
yeah.
much
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
information, Hans, as you can
Okay,
give, because I think that relates to creating workforce housing. I think those numbers tie to each other, so
I'm glad you brought that up, actually, workforce housing, because I did have a number about that too that I scribbled down over here. So one of the things, we have 113,269 households in the county, and about 20% of those are rentals. So I focus in on rentals because that's where we can affect the most change. We can make an allocation toward a tax credit program and get a lot more units out of it than, not that home buyer programs are not important, they're one at a time though. And so it takes a while to gain more housing units that way. Not that it's unimportant. But 4,500 of those households are at 50% or more of their income. So that's rent burdened, severe rent burden.
That's
And
dangerous.
a subset of that number, 3,011, are at 30% or less of area median income. So this is our concerning population because it's one paycheck away from homelessness. So that's what's called now a qualifying population. So Home ARP has allowed that to be a qualifying, technically homeless individual or household when they're at that level.
I just would make a suggestion, Madam Chair, that this be an issue, whether it be a subcommittee or whether it be, I think that there's a lot of people, myself included, that are very focused in on this workforce housing. So maybe, I'll leave it in your hands, but maybe we can talk about, really having the time to focus in on something like that and bring a solution to the board to consider. So, Lou and I have been talking about this for a gazillion years. But I would ask that we further, dive into this and see if there isn't someplace we can go or help or focus in on, so.
Yeah, and I think if we keep it on the agenda, we keep it in front of us, so it doesn't drift off to the sides, and, well, not that I would let that happen.
But I think that it would behoove us to actually have, again, attention. You know,
Yes.
this is something that we focus, whether we take a committee meeting or it's something after the committee, I don't know. I leave that with you and Peter, whatever, and Hans, but I think it really is a subject that needs to rise to the top a little bit more, so.
Absolutely.
So, there was, sorry, he nodded, not you.
I think I've been agreeing with that better part of the thing, so yeah.
A couple board meetings ago, Member Godmaller talked about the number of open housing rental units in the county, and I think I remember he said 12, but 8 of them were condemned, is that? And so there were really only 4 at that particular point?
So what you'll see, and I think, I don't know if I mentioned this to you Lou, when we talked last, but what he was referring to was the state has designated McHenry, the city of McHenry, as an area of need, and that was the numbers that they had. Is that they're, like, if you wanted to rent any kind of unit at that time of their assessment, there were like basically 4 available at that time. So what you're seeing now is developers seeking tax credits are always going to seek those tax credits in those areas because they score better on the application to the state's tax credit program.
Which is why we had the application from the entity that got the ARPA monies from McHenry. It's precisely
Correct.
that.
Correct, and then Full Circle Communities is another one where they would add another one next to Pearl Street over there that's already there.
Right.
You'll have one in Johnsburg that's seeking funds. I think they've actually gotten the tax credit, so.
I think they did.
And they
Well,
got
and
some other-
Diecast in Woodstock has an affordable housing component to the development, but it's senior housing, which happens a lot. But, you know, I'm not saying seniors don't need affordable housing, but I think because it's more acceptable in communities to have indigent seniors than it is to have working families that are at 60% or below the, you know, at or below the moderate income level. And so it's a hard sell. And it's one that I think we can strategize around. You know, I just think families in shelters are just a train wreck. I don't care what anybody says. You know, I worked in Rockford and ooh.
And it can certainly help with the prioritization of applicants that come in. So when you get an application for a tax credit project, part of your assessment can be what population is being served. I will tell you that, like, we've won a lot of tax credits over the past several years, and we've got one in Crystal Lake, one in Cary, one in one in Richmond, one in Huntley, that are all senior focused. Prior to that, we had one in Lake in the Hills that is families. So that we are very interested in families, but we realize there's still the need for the permanent supportive housing like Pearl Street Commons is, because those are individuals that need a lot of assistance. So the need is great everywhere, but definitely the families, you know, that's more people that you keep out of a shelter. If you think about it that way, if 4 people move into an affordable unit.
Well, it's less people doubling up in households that don't have space, that, you know, it reduces the anxiety. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but when my kids come and stay for me for a weekend, I'm like, oh, thank God they leave, I'm gonna stay. But,
That was just recorded.
if you may want, okay, I'll get better at this, I promise. An overloaded household is never, you know, a great place. Why didn't you tell me? It's never a great place to stack up kids and, you know, and then changing school districts all the time because you're couch surfing. I mean, it's just hard, and I don't think it should be that hard. That's what I think.
Well, we will
I'm
definitely-
excited. I think a subcommittee or.
Yeah, we'll definitely get that on future agendas.
Yes.
I think that's a great
Thank
idea.
you.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Are we ready to move on to Senior Services Grant Commission?
We are.
Again with Hans.
So Pete gave you a little bit of an overview about.
You put that so gently.
You know, so we're the Senior Services Grant Commission. It sort of lived in the administration office, and in about 2014, a portion of the responsibilities moved over to community development, and that was the grant making process and working with the commission.
Because you were dealing with a lot of the same people.
And then, as of 2021, the entire operation moved over, so all the billing and everything else too. So it's all handled by CE. So that funding has been tethered at $1.645 million per year since I think about 2015. The allocations go to several community providers. The main goal of the program is as you know, under state statute, is really to keep people from being institutionalized and to provide senior transportation and senior service centers. So some of our organizations that are big providers in the community are the major recipients of the funding: Independence Health and Therapy, Senior Services Associates, Senior Care Volunteer Network. All of those organizations, that's their mission, and that's the applicants that come into the program. We are now reporting the outcomes into what's called our consolidated plan response letter, or CAPER report, that goes to HUD. We served 8,000 clients in the time, in about 3 of the quarters, because our quarters don't line up with how we report to HUD. So 8,000 individuals with a spending of $1.5 million at that, for those 3 quarters was how many individuals were served. For this program, there's a separate commission from the CDHG commissions, the Senior Services Grant Commission, and that's the group that makes the funding recommendations to the county board. They meet 4 times a year. Typically, the first meeting of the year is more of an educational thing. We may have speakers come in from other, like Age Guide or some other organizations, to talk about some trends and some things that we're seeing that are needs for seniors. The second and third meetings really focus more on the second one is more on the development of the application for that year. It starts off with a pre-application, and then third meeting is really focused in on who proceeds from the pre-application to full application. We commonly will have a couple applicants come in every year that, for one reason or another, the commission decides will not proceed to full app. And then the meeting in September is focused in on the hearings. All of the applicants have to come in and make a presentation. That's for both of our commissions, by the way. That's a requirement. All of them come in to make a presentation for a pitch for their funds. So one of the things you could see from looking at the original lineup of the Senior Services Grant Commission, when we had it fully full with 17 individuals, and it was quite terrifying for some of the individuals to go and make their presentation. I remember sitting in this room, and we had, you know, the tables just kind of going way down that way. And some of the people that I think were very well respected individuals that were coming in for funding were shaking like this with their papers, like going up there to make their pitch for their annual funds. So, but it is something that it's a very good way to sort of work with the group and work with the individuals who are seeking the funds to determine what the needs are and ask those important questions about their applications.
And I apologize. I'm a real big believer in evaluation. You know, we're giving grants. Is it working? Is it the approach? So I just focus in on that too. I don't like to give grants or monetary assistance to entities that aren't getting results at the end of that program. So I bring that to your attention too. I'll be watching that. You know, money may be better allocated to somebody else who's getting better outcomes. I'm really outcome based.
And one of so the outcomes are done in 2 different ways. So there are the service units and individuals served, which is the sort of, I guess I would call it the CDBG way, which is counting people and that kind of a thing. And then within their application, so that's that 3rd meeting, the application, well, 4th meeting is where you're evaluating, but the 3rd one where it's determined, they have to report on what I would call more community development outcomes, where they make those determinations in their old application. So you said, for example, if you're Home of the Sparrow, that you would have at least 85% of the individuals leaving your shelter moving to permanent housing at exit. What were your actual outcomes? So that's just one example. Some of them are much more scientific sounding than that, or evidence-based than that, and it'll be very detailed to the point where it's pretty intense, but they're working on evidence-based practices. So what we'll see in some of those settings is that there may not be as many individuals served, but the level of services are very intense. And so you don't compare apples to oranges and say, well, you serve 500 people and you serve 20, but those 20 might have been extremely difficult to serve. So we allow the organizations, instead of having these uniform sort of goals and outcomes, we allow them to set that in their application when they present, and then report on it the following year when they come back for renewal funding.
again, hard to measure some special ed and mental health issues by just numbers, so I appreciate that greatly.
Ms. Wagner?
So, in the cycle then of the meetings, they give their presentation in September, and then the results come in, so like, let's say I was on it, when would I see the results of the grants?
You would see it at the end of that day. So.
I'm sorry, the evidence-based results you were talking about. So, like, let's say, you were talking about Home on the Sparrow. Let's say that they requested $20,000, and then their numbers came back at some point. Is that a year from the time that they're given, or do you, how often is the reporting done?
We track quarterly reports, and those are gonna be the people type of outcomes. And then within that application that you'll be reviewing for the September meeting, which typically you'll have a week, at least a week earlier, if not, sometimes it's been like 3 weeks earlier. You'll have the results of their last year, so that you can review those results and have, sort of be armed with information to make determinations whether or not the organization should receive continued funding. Should we look at reducing it, eliminating it, et cetera.
So the only, let's say they're not performing as they said they would on their application. Or do we ever ask for the money back because they have not performed, or do we just possibly not give them grant money in the future?
We've opted for the latter of the two, that there's no future funding. We haven't asked for anything back. The times where we've done that with CDBG have been like a program year end or coming in over budget, those get swept, so that happens kind of frequently.
And it's all reimbursement, correct?
It's all reimbursement for all of our grant programs.
Plus, don't we also do an opportunity, if we don't see those things, to sit down with those entities and indicate? I mean, there's a remediation perspective to that too, right?
Correct. Yeah,
Okay.
we do have a staff person who will be assigned to the program. We had a person assigned as of last year that had moved on to work with the city of Woodstock and then to the Alzheimer's Foundation, who's really focused in on the senior population. We'll have another staff person assigned to make monitoring reviews and those kinds of things. So those are parts of the program that we've added in when it all moved over to community development. So it's not like, surprise, you get an application at the end of the year with like last year's outcomes. We'll be much more aware of what their outcomes are like through those monitoring visits.
And the experience is that the monitoring, based on how the data looks to the money, whether they're performing under their grant, and typically funders jump in right away so that they can help that agency retain the funding. And it could be they lost a staff person. I mean, so I think that's been my experience. They don't just pull the money back. And they might even fund a second year, and if it doesn't improve, pull money back. So, I mean, I would think you monitor.
We do.
And you say, tell me why, you have to talk about why these numbers are down.
Or why
they're
numbers are down,
underperforming.
why reports aren't coming, those kinds of things. The most common thing you mentioned is attrition of staff. The other thing that we've seen since the pandemic is the amount of money. It's just that organizations that got X amount of dollars in grants, now it's 3X, and multiple different opportunities that they've gotten funding under. So that's been a challenge if you didn't add staffing in to track all of that information. It's difficult on our end, and we've had to spend a great deal of time with some of our agencies to work through that.
Just a procedural question. So when these organizations request their reimbursement, how does that goes to the auditor's office, correct?
It starts with our office for review, and then it goes to, in the case of the senior service program right now, the approval goes to Kevin Gueso, and then that passes through the auditor's office next. And then usually, I think Doty might be involved from finance, and then the treasurer's office, kind of removing all the funds. So multiple layers with CDBG at home, all of those kinds of things. The approving person with Adam, and then it goes through the same process with the auditor's office, et cetera.
So, building on Kelly's question, how long is that? Typically, from the moment they ask for the money, the reimbursement, to when they actually get the check?
It could be pretty quick. So the check runs are done every Wednesday. If we have the approvals all completed by the auditor's office, it could go out the following Wednesday.
Okay.
So for example, if we got one today, and it all pans out, it could go very quickly. If there are errors, that we catch on our end, we're gonna reject it and send it back to that organization or work with them to determine what the error was and fix it before it goes down to the auditor. That may be additional time involved. Sometimes they're underspending, we're working with them on that kind of an issue. A good example would be the senior programs where they've changed the staff position or something like that, and the person's doing some of the other person's duties, then we could kind of bill for that. But the process can be very quick. I think if you're talking about exactly right now, there are an awful lot of bills going through just because of year end and everything and wanting to close out the last fiscal year. But commonly it's a few weeks, could be as long as a month. It's
That's
the
all I
most
wanted
typical time
to
frame.
indicate, that they weren't sitting and waiting for months and months and months. It typically is relatively quick.
Yeah, we attempt to get through things as quickly as we can, you know, so it's definitely, it's part of the whole monitoring process that we do. It's what we call desk monitoring. That's when you're reviewing everything. We're a community that we review every single transaction, so we're not, there are some people that spot check or whatever, they just pay the bill, and every fifth bill that comes through, we look through everything, so.
Thank you.
Ms. Maschin, yes. Ms.
So
Maschin.
Chris Masters, I'm gonna follow Pam's suggestion, saying my name. How many openings are there currently on the Senior Services Grant Commission? Because there were a number of losses at the end of last year for the community portion of the people.
So for sure, right now, it would be the township supervisor and the township highway person. I believe that there is an at-large one, we just filled one, but I'm trying to think, there might be another one open after that,
So there's 3 open from the at-large.
if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it would be, but those specifically designated to are the most difficult to fill.
What kind of measures do we try to recruit for those?
So for the townships, we go to the group of the townships that meets, I don't know the name of that group, but we
Probably the
typically try to work with them.
township supervisors,
Yeah,
most likely, yeah.
it's that group that we will go to. The township highway person, we had a person designated to that role, and since that time, they've not been able to come up with anyone. So it's been just an awful challenge. And, you know, the last person that we had was the township supervisor, was Lee Jennings, and he passed away while he was in the role. So, but he's actually a great commissioner. He has a lot of very good questions, but we haven't had anyone since his time.
But that does hurt quorum too, right? Having
does.
those open, they are counted, and even if they're not a filled position, it counts in not having quorum.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so that's part of the challenge, is that you had maybe a few county board members that were not able to attend, and then you had an open position, and then you had another highway person, and then, you know, it starts to add up of non-available individuals or non-present. So definitely a challenge.
Okay, any more questions or comments for Hans? Okay, well, thank you everyone for your presentations.
You're welcome.
We'll just move on to future topics. And here is kind of, you know, where we would just maybe have a short discussion on what you guys would like to see on future agendas. You know, I already have noted here the workforce housing, so we'll be sure to, you know, maybe even make that a permanent line item. But I really think it's important. You know, when you walk out of, you know, this meeting, I want everybody here to feel connected, to feel value, and to be seen. I think that's really important for us working on this committee, you know, especially on the issues that this committee deals with. So with that, is there anything that you guys would like to see on the agenda?
At some point, I'd like us to discuss Title 10.
Is Title X money currently flowing into the county through other agencies?
I think that was a question that we had looked into a while back. And I don't want to answer for the other entities, but there are services that, like, for example, federally qualified health centers are required to provide those services.
That would
To
be
what
next.
extent, and if there are gaps, I think there is data that we do not yet have.
Is that Aunt Martha's, are they in?
Yeah, and then there's the Greater Elgin in McHenry, and there is, I don't want to get it.
Is it the
There's
reference?
another one up in Woodstock, Community Health Partnership.
Crystal Lake.
No,
No, Crystal Lake is Family Health Partnership, not to be confused with community health partnership.
Right,
These
that
are
you
part of
said.
larger federally qualified health centers in Illinois.
So are you saying Family Health Partnership does not receive them, or you don't?
They do.
They're not a federally qualified health center.
But they do.
Right, so I just want, I'm not saying they're not providing that, I don't know what exactly their funding makeup is, but federally qualified health centers are required to provide those services.
Okay.
Okay. Well, this is not a future topic. I just wanted to mention that we do have a tour available to anybody interested with the health department, with animal control also. And
Yes, that will require
a move to
travel,
Crystal Lake.
correct.
And are we gonna go across the street also? Is
Ideally,
that-
yeah, so any
Okay.
combination of those things, but we're available to tour this building first, then go over to Annex A, and for those who are adventurous, move on to Crystal Lake.
Okay, so I just wanted to mention that to anybody who is interested. Next item, executive session, which I do not believe we have anything. So lastly, adjournment. Anybody
Motion to
like-
adjourn.
Motion by Ellen Altough, seconded by Mr. Short to do that. Thank you, everyone. We will see you February 2nd.
So if you sit next to me, I'm just gonna harass you.
I'll take it.